How to sew charming chains. This is a pattern from Amber Makes to make a garland of everlasting paper chains from fabric. Cutting the fabric. Gather together all your fabric or your charm squares. The charm squares are 5 by 5 inch squares, or if you prefer, you can use larger pieces of fabric cut down to size. Take a mixture of prints and colours, depending on whether you want a coordinated look or just go for a mixture of prints and patterns if you want a scrappy look. Take one of the charm squares and cut it in half. I've used a rotary cutter and a ruler for this, but you can draw the line with a pencil and cut along it with scissors. If you're using larger fabric pieces, cut them all into pieces 2.5 by 5 inches each. Making the chain links. Take one of the chain strips that you've already cut and fold one short end over by 1/4 inch to the wrong side. If you measure 1/2 inch in from the short end and then fold the edge to meet up with that pin that you've marked, then you've folded it over by 1/4 inch. So press that in place just to hold it. Now take this chain strip and fold it in half with right sides facing, making sure that the long short ends and the short raw ends match up, so that you've got the long raw ends and the short raw ends all matching up. Now you need to pin it together. Make sure that those ends that you've just turned under stay turned under. Just check on the other side that you've pinned them and they are staying turned under. Then pin them together so that those long raw ends are matching and then the short raw ends are matching. Now starting from the turned over short ends, stitch together down the long end and across the short end, but not across the top. That needs to stay open. So now you have a tube that's sewn together at one end. To reduce the bulk in your finished chain links, trim off the corners. So trim off that bottom corner, trim across that corner, and then to take a little bit of bulk from here, trim off the top, making sure you don't cut into the seam. Now you need to turn the tube right sides out. I've used a turning tube for this. So you place the plastic tube inside and then you push the tube through using the stick provided. So that's a really quick and easy way to turn your tube out. Make sure that those folded under ends stay folded under. If they've come out at all as you've turned it, just pop them back in. You can then use the end of the stick to push out the corners, making sure that you don't pierce the fabric, so do it carefully. And that completes one of the chain links. Again, I'm just adjusting it to make sure those ends are turned under. Now, if you don't have a churning tube, you can use the spare yarn method instead. So before you sew together your chain strip, open it out and place a length of yarn inside. My yarn's about 4 inches longer than the finished tube. Trap the short end between where the raw ends are and just pin that into place. Have about 1 inch poking out. And then you can pin the chain strip together, making sure that that piece of yarn stays along the fold so you don't sew through it. Sew the chain strip together just like you did before. Now you can see the yarn is trapped in the seam at one end and sticking out of the other. Trim off the corners just like you did before. So trim off the bottom corners and then a little bit off the top corner. Now take hold of the length of yarn that's sticking out of the turned under ends and give it a pull. You may need to ease the bottom slightly by just turning that bottom edge under just to get it out, because if you pull it too hard, then your yarn will break. But if you just ease the end under by folding it under a little bit, then you can just pull the length of yarn and the end will come out quite easily. Again, you'll need to turn under those turned under ends again. Now, with the yarn, if you just give it a little tug, it'll just come out. You might have a little bit of fluff left, but it will come out because it's just narrow yarn. And there you are, it's turned right sides out. So all you need to do now with your chain link, make sure again that those ends are still turned under and give it a little press, just to set the seams and make it nice and flat. You can spray it with starch or synthetic starch at this point if you want to add little stiffness. It's not necessary because these chain links are quite small, but you can if you like. Then repeat that process to make all of your chain links in exactly the same way. You can sort them into piles of colours at this stage if you want, so that you can make sure that you join them in a specific order, or you can just keep them all mixed up and join them together randomly. Creating the chain. Now you've made all your chain links, you can join them together. This is the way that I did it. There are several ways, but this is the easiest way. Fold the seamed short end on top of the turned under short ends, so it overlaps by about 1/8 of an inch. Doesn't have to be exact, but just so it overlaps a little bit. Making sure that the seamed end is on top because it's a bit neater. Now sew it together by hand. So all you have to do with this is take a length of thread and work a few stitches at one end on top of each other. I would work 3, 4, 5 stitches on top because it's important that that stays in place. Then simply slip stitch together by placing the needle underneath the fabric in one chain and then into the fabric on the top of the other side of the chain. Try and make sure that the stitches don't come all the way through to the other side, but it doesn't really matter because it will be hidden within the chain. Once you get to the other end, I've only done about 3 slip stitches there. Secure the thread by working a few stitches on top of each other. It's these securing stitches at the beginning and the end of the slip stitching that are important because this will hold it together, as you only need a few stitches to secure the chain. And then trim off the end, and if you've left a length where you started your chain, then trim that off as well. So that's one chain link created. Now take the next chain link, fold that around the one that you first done, overlap the seamed short end on top of the folded under short ends, and repeat. I'm going to pin this together just to hold it straight, and then sew this together in exactly the same way. So take your needle and thread, secure the end by over sewing. If you leave a length of thread at the end before you do this, then it doesn't just pull out straight away and you can trim it off later. So again, secure the end and then slip stitch the two together. I'm just going to trim off that end now because it's nice and secure. If you like, you could also sew this together using a running stitch and some decorative thread. That would just make it more decorative, but it doesn't really matter because these seamed ends where you've joined them together will be arranged in the chain so they're inside. Now there are other ways of fastening the ends if you want to separate them. If you have a look at the instructions, I've suggested a few ways like Velcro or snap fasteners. Obviously they take longer to insert, but it does mean that you can separate the chains if you want to make them different lengths or if you want to be able to store them flat. But for this little chain, the quickest and the easiest way is just to very simply stitch them together. So once you've done that, you've now joined together 2 chain links. Rearrange them so the seam sits inside the other chain link. Now repeat that with all of the chain links. So this is one whole charm pack of 40 charm squares that I've joined together just in random colour order to make 2.5 metres of chain. Now my fabric chain is ready to loop across my mantelpiece, hang on my tree, or it makes a lovely Christmas gift for somebody.